Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talk They Hear You podcast. What parents are saying, prevention wisdom, authenticity, and empowerment. I'm Debbie Burnt, Director of Parent Movement 2.0, and I'll be your host. Today, we're excited to speak with the makers of the award-winning Screenagers documentary series. The most recent film, Screenagers Under the Influence, was just released and looks at the way vaping, drugs, and alcohol are portrayed in digital media. This is influencing our teens and what parents can do about it. Dr. Delaney, Ruston, and Lisa Tabb, who co-directed and co-produced the film, have been working on this series for over 10 years. Together, they have sparked a movement around screen time, teen mental health, and now underage substance use. Over 9 million kids and adults have viewed these movies in community screenings in over 100 different countries. So let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Delaney. Welcome, Lisa.
Hello.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. We always start by asking our guests, are you parents? And if so, what are the ages of your kids? Our listeners just like knowing what phase of parenting our guests are in.
I have 2 children, and one just finished college and one is in college.
Lisa?
And I have 2 children, and my youngest just became not a teen last week. So I'm done with the teen years as of a week ago, and my second is a year out of college.
Oh, that's fantastic. So just so you know, I have 3 kids as well. I have 27, 24, and 19. So we're still doing some of that teenage stuff. So tell us a little bit about the Screenager series. You know, this is really a unique focus on mental health for today. How did you get to this 3rd edition? Just any kind of background about it.
Yes. Well, Debbie, I was working, as you mentioned, in documentaries for mental health. And about 11 years ago, I got really concerned about the struggles in our family related to our kids wanting more and more screen time. So that's when I, as a physician and mom, wanted to look more deeply into this and started to film and was thrilled that Lisa came on board. And that became the first film, Screenagers. And what was so evident is that the tech revolution was so massive and these issues so intense that we really needed to bring people together in communities, that the film needed to speak to young people, parents, educators. And so we really created a whole program around bringing people together to see the films. And after that, we were really interested in particularly the mental health challenges that were being impacted by the tech revolution. And that led to Screenager's next chapter, looking at all sorts of mental health situations from everyday stress to much more. And how did that interact with this digital age that we're in? And then finally, Lisa and I were really interested in the fact that there is so much images around and substances in the media and so little discussion about this. And so we wanted to see what is the impact of all of these substances, cannabis and shrooms and all these things being in the media in all different ways. How is that impacting teens' decisions to use or to not use? And that led us to the most current film, Screenagers Under the Influence.
And I just want to jump in and say one other thing, which is we had been listening because we do these movies in community and have large groups of parents and kids. And we'd really been listening to what the struggles were out there from our audiences and knew that this was the next issue they wanted us to delve into. And we know that this is one of the hardest things to do as a parent, is parenting around substances. And so how do we do this skillfully? And what is the evidence around there in terms of what's effective? What's the innovation out there?
So the Talk They Hear You campaign is really about so many things, but that community piece is so important. And we actually even just released a bunch of community tools this year and to really kind of empower. And the fact that you have so many years of experience and an awareness or that perspective that says, if we're not talking about all this together, if we're not working through all this together, we're missing an opportunity, at least. So I want to talk to you more about that in a minute, but let's just start with some of these major themes in media that are out there. That idea that our kids are so exposed to alcohol and drugs as products, and then also their use and all kinds of features and benefits about that use. How do you kind of set up just media in general and messaging? And let's kind of just start there.
Yeah. Well, let's actually start with a fairly recent study by the CDC that did a survey of teen boys. I'm not sure why it was only boys, but they were particularly interested in that. And one of the issues that they were looking at is the prevalence of shows that show alcohol. And so they surveyed these teen boys to see what their favorite shows were. And then they did independent analysis of how often alcohol was either being shown or being talked about. And how did that relate to the TV rating of the show? And what they found is that of those top ranked shows, that TV rating, just TV 14, so saying it's perfectly fine for 14 and older, they found that there were 20.1 impressions per hour of alcohol, again, being either shown or talked about. So our young people are being, as one example, bombarded in the media by different discussions. And that was one of the reasons why I got really interested in this, because I was kind of stunned when my son was in 8th grade and wanted to watch this superhero show. And I would look over, and it was the superhero himself, when he wasn't in his outfit, was so often in a bar, literally doing shots. So that combination of a superhero, which is all about not showing emotions and being tough, pairing that with these characters very frequently drinking hard alcohol, was like, wow.
Just hearing you say that, I'm realizing how desensitized I was. I don't have any recollection of there being alcohol in that show. Granted, that was many years ago, so that might be the problem. But we do just kind of accept it as a normative thing that's out there, but our kids are really being exposed.
Yeah, interestingly, when we were putting together Screenagers Under the Influence, we were going to put some what is called B-roll, some video in the movie. And I went on looking for some popular shows to see, well, this is going to take me a few hours to find just the right one. And I could not believe that almost every show that I looked at, whether it was a simple family show or a crime show, there was no genre I was putting in, and it was so easy for me to find it in every show and trailer for it. And we're not even discussing here the media that kids are getting on their phones all day, every day, in their pocket, access 24/7, that are coming through everything.
Let me just ask, because we're also thinking a little bit about, it's the end of summer and school's about to start. Is there any kind of recommendation or direction for parents relative to this? What should we make of just media in general before we even talk about social media? And is there anything we should do in your minds?
Yeah, the goal is that they actually do have our voices in their head, even if it bothers them, when they're watching media or receiving images on their social media that have substances in them. The key is how we have these conversations, and it's the work that we've been doing now for over 7 years, in particular a blog that's each week that has different kind of evidence-based ways to talk with young people that is going to decrease their defensiveness to the conversations. Because we hear constantly, oh, just talk to your kids. Well, they're going to, so often, if we do it in an ineffective way, it can backfire and just make more tension in the family. So it's really about committing as a parent to, I would say, once a month, you'll decide a short thought of conversation about a substance. And over time, they're going to have more understanding of what they're watching, what they're posting, what they're doing through these less charged types of conversation. I'll give an example. Just this week, we posted about mushrooms because there's lots in the news about this renaissance of all the possible potential of shrooms. And yet there's very little discussion about risks and what to do about those risks. So rather than say, remember, don't take any psychedelics or anything, a side door that we put was a law that's being discussed in California to legalize what are the risks and the upsides of that, and to have that discussion as a way of creating this mindfulness in our children. Ultimately, I would say the number one thing is to be talking about it as their decisions. Everybody in their life is going to need to make decisions about what substances they do and do not take. So I'm constantly using this language with my kids, so whatever you decide to do or those decisions you make, I'm wondering, what have you heard about the new concentration of THC? That, as a doctor, is the way that we do it, because we've known through the ages that that's what allows the defensiveness to come down and the information to come in.
And another thing we often do in our suggestions for how to talk is to start with a positive question so that you are not just going directly into something in a way that is going to make them defensive or upset. So how do you get their brains kind of starting more open? And that's one good way to do that.
Yeah.
And I'll just give an example of that. So we do that a lot in Screenagers, the first film. You see me completely messing up because I'm just doing a scare tactic with my kids, and they're tuning out because they're like, this is fun to be on screens. What are you talking about, right? But rather than a scare tactic, starting off conversations with them like, God, I just learned of this great new app that's helping me understand the traffic that I'm going to be driving in better. Or, wow, this comedian, I'm getting little bits of her pieces that are wonderful. And that can be done in that same way with discussions around substances. That they're, how great that we're no longer putting people, we're not talking about these sentences that would go on forever and that have destroyed families. I mean, really hard things. So let's talk about the positives about that. But let's also say, wait, how are we going to do this safely, and what limits are we going to have? That's an example. There's thousands of examples to say some benefits. It's a little, that people like to drink to relax, for example. You mentioned these things, and it helps teens to absorb the other information better.
I'm so glad you gave some examples, because I was just going to add, how do you talk positively about substance and putting it in that cultural context? Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I don't think anybody wants anybody being hurt by, certainly legislation, but just in general. So that's great.
I just wanted to say, and also talking about, so those are like the weekly conversations, but also in our modeling, there's some implicit interactions that happen when they see something, but there's also something you can do to explain what you're doing. So I noticed, like, my husband has been substituting non-alcoholic beer for regular beer on weeknights. And he's not saying it from a didactic perspective, but he points it out sometimes, I'm going to have this, it's Tuesday and this seems like a good choice. And actually it actually tastes just like beer, and so I really appreciate him saying that about his own experience without oversharing his super negative experiences in the past necessarily, but just something positive, a little change he's doing.
I love that. And let's talk about modeling a little bit more, because you've just kind of described some nuance to it, which I think is so important for parents to understand. There's lots of different ways to model. And you also have a group in your film called Raising the Bar. It seems very parent specific. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this group, Raising the Bar, it's an initiative that was born out of a Healthy Youth Coalition that I'm actually a part of. It is all about being aware of what we are doing in kids' spaces and making intentional decisions. So, for instance, let's not have the sideline margaritas or beers at the kids' baseball games. Let's not have the Alco Pops at the 8-year-old's birthday party for the parents. I mean, again, I know I'm saying let's not, but these are some of the ways that we think about things. And then it was kind of launched and pushed out in my community when my kids were in high school. There was Sunday baseball games where the parents would bring the mimosas for the sidelines. And so it just became a conversation. And also at the prom parties. In our movie, in Screenagers Under the Influence, we feature one of the founding members of it who talks about his pre-prom gathering at his house, where he sent out an email to all of his to the parents of all the kids that were going to come to the house. I was actually one of those parents, and said, we're not going to serve alcohol. Please don't bring bottles of wines and things while the kids are there. The kids are going to get on a bus and go off to the prom, and then it's okay. And we had just as much fun, right, at that party, where we were focused on the kids' experience. Because how can we possibly say and be upset that they're going to go off, have alcohol and other things on that party bus, right, when we've just modeled that? So in our community, it's in almost every school ball field, it's and the gymnasiums, there's signs that just a reminder, raising the bar. That's all there is to it.
It's just so exciting to hear the community of parents coming together and, hey, just being a little more intentional, a little more mindful. What's an hour without a glass of wine? Kind of putting it in perspective and really modeling for our kids how to have fun without it, which is exciting. This idea that you were talking about a minute ago about making conversations a practice, and I guess we can extend that to making modeling a practice. It's really interesting. We don't have to wait around for that moment. We could just put in our calendar, monthly recurring calendar event to talk to kids about drugs and alcohol as a way of just getting this going. Really liked that.
Yeah. Well, that's what actually prompted starting this blog, which was, for me, my research after my residency was in human communication. And so I've had been researching it ever since, a deep interest in what are more effective ways that humans in kind of sticky conversations, right? Talk about substances as a tricky conversations. And so what I was doing wrong in my family, or ineffectively, I should say, was having reactive conversations, i.e. screaming or just stab and grab, like stabbing my kids with my eyes and grabbing whatever tech they had. And so I really needed to create a weekly setting where it was fun. So if anybody's struggling as a family, just start with the fun part so that it's going to talk just about what's great about our tech revolution. So everyone shares something they're loving, a show they love, an app, a movie, whatever. And then the fourth time, after you do that, you say, okay, well, what's a challenge we're facing? And you can start with yourself, like, oh, I've been checking my email on my phone when I'm out and about in a way that I used to not do as much. That's a nice way to say we're all dealing. And then having that time, 5 minutes once a week, is really the key to address the same thing. In that same conversation, one day it would be about how they did this study on the exposure that teens are having around alcohol. What do you guys think the number was? Or how frequent do you think in reality TV shows the alcohol is? And gosh, do you think that people ever go on dates without alcohol? Because if you see a show, you would never think so. And so it's really the game changer in my family and many families that have been following our weekly blog that has evidence-based ways of talking about with specific questions at the end.
Yeah.
Can I say one other thing around that is that this idea around community, one of the key parts about our film and the way that we deliver it is we committed to just having it shown in community. So individuals can't just get it on service, but it's the schools or the community organizations, the coalitions, the churches, the synagogues, the mosques. They're all licensing the movie and showing it in community. And I often get angry parents saying, why can't I just watch? And the point is that we don't feel like these issues are going to be solved independently in our silos. We really believe in the power of the community coming together and trying to get on the same page, and then all the stakeholders are on the same page, and it just makes a bigger impact. And so those conversations that we can have weekly or even daily can also happen in classrooms and are happening in classrooms. We have a whole platform that schools will use, can access the movies and curriculum.
It's just so insightful and so powerful, and that you've committed to the community aspect of this topic is just, it's something, I have to say. Is there anything else about community? I know in the program there was talking about jobs and bosses and creating this opportunity to form more positive connections, or your child's ability to form more positive connections beyond just the family. And tell us a little bit about the dynamics of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we're talking about community, and I'm going to give an example of the film, let me add that one of the reasons these films take a lot of love and patience is we need to ensure that young people who see the film resonate with it, that they don't feel like it's judgy, preachy. And so that takes a lot of work. And we are so appreciative to the families and the teens who share their stories. And the stories and the science are all about solutions. There's a lot of documentaries that bring up difficult topics, and then at the end there might be just a tad. But for us, it's very much woven, very specifics of what can be done. Let me give an example. We were so delighted that author Rosalind Weissman said she would be in the film. I had called her about some of the research she did for her many books, including Queen Bees and Wannabes, that became the movie, transformed via Tina Fey into the movie Mean Girls. When I called her about one of her several books, some research, she actually said, oh my gosh, I have personally struggled so much with my son Elijah around these topics, and felt the silos that parenting is, and wanted to make sure that I could help with this. And I said, wow, would maybe you and your son be in the film? And they said, okay. So they both share kind of their stories. And for Elijah, how he had really struggled with low self-esteem as a middle schooler and early high school, and felt like being with the older kids and drinking would placate those feelings. And the mother, meanwhile, Rosalind, was really worried. And so what she did, and she had really intentionally did this, is because she knew as a parenting person that they're going to often at times turn off to their messages, how to create a community. So she met a barber who she just loved his persona and the way he communicated with her. And he said, hey, can my son start to get his haircut here? And it turned out that it became his first job. And what is beautiful in the movie is that you see Elijah and the barber talking, reflecting on the past, and Elijah expressing how important it was hearing messages from this mentor that helped him to make new decisions about who he wanted to spend time with. So rather than parents, saying, oh, who are your friends? And you should change friends. Think about creating these positive adults and others in their life who are giving subtle and overt messages about, hey, are these the decisions you want to be making?
Yeah, and you just never know who that person in your child's life they're going to connect to. And giving as many different kinds of opportunities, whether, trying to get them to participate in, whether it's band and maybe it's the band leader, or it's soccer and it's the soccer coach, or it's a job, or it's a teacher, or it's your best friend, or whatever. But giving those opportunities, being intentional about those opportunities. And that was definitely what Rosalind did. I have a friend right now who has a 16-year-old who has struggled with substance use, and he was very involved in sports when he was younger. And then through the pandemic, things started to fall, and he aged up, and he just stopped having any other outside activities. But then he was motivated by making money, and so he did. Once he was 15, he got a job and ended up loving this job. He got a job at a restaurant, and the owners loved him, and he suddenly started getting all this great positive feedback from these people. And I saw this transformation. Not only was his time now taken up, so there was less time,
Right.
he had to show up on time, he had to be able to work without being under the influence of anything. And then they gave him a birthday party, and I love hearing those stories, and I feel like that can play a big part. So just knowing that there's a lot of different ways.
It's so powerful, I think, for parents to broaden their perspective beyond the family walls and look at what else is influencing my child. Those are some great examples.
I just want to add one other one, because we do, while this new film is not strictly at all about addiction, we do look at the science about, and I often use the word reinforcing, that certain activities and substances are reinforcing, more so for some people than other people. And as humans, we are susceptible to things that are reinforcing. And one of those things is, for example, social media and being entertained and getting a new bit of something exciting. It could be posting and getting really reinforcement by getting things liked. In the film, we meet a wonderful young man, Joshua, who went from straight A's and loving school to being reinforced by video games. And ultimately, while parents often think, well, they're not doing substances on video games, this isn't Joshua's situation. But for many teens, as I know as a physician, that can be in conjunction with cannabis. So, and that is more common than parents know. Not to say for them to get hyper vigilant and worried, but there's not a one or the other. Ultimately, for Joshua, who fortunately wasn't also consuming substances, was able to, through his mother actually doing kind of a destructive thing because she was frustrated, basically getting rid of the device, he actually was appreciative, and he actually got a job lifeguarding, and he talks about how transformational that was for him.
These stories are so encouraging to me. They are a little daunting, though, as well, because it's more parent intention and parent strategy, and finding that right person, directing your kid to different things, which we just have to do. But let's talk a little bit more about social media. And then I want to ask you about busting myths too. I do feel like at the end of the day, it does come back to my influence as a parent. So what are some other things I need to know or understand or be able to talk about, either from a science standpoint or a myth standpoint with my kids? But first, social media. I feel like social media and mental health are a huge topic right now. And anything you would tell us, perspective or recommendations as parents?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with just being upfront about the reality. On social media, they're seeing a lot of substances, and they're hearing it through the music, that their friends are posting things at times. And so that's a new phenomenon. We used to know, okay, who was doing what substances at high school, but now we're influenced by a much broader local visuals, as well as the influencers that they follow, or TikTok feeds them, or reels on Instagram feeds them. So that is a lot. We have to make sure we don't just assume that it's social media, because any screen time issues, whether that's video games and Discord, which is social media, that overuse is a real concern. And parents have often a myth that, well, teens just need to figure this out on their own. Or, like me, this feeling like I want to help decrease their social media use and screen time to make sure they have a fuller life. But I don't know how to do it other than this scare tactic, which isn't working. So it's committing to working with teens to have their input, but to use science to say, I know that having access to social media all the time is not healthy. How are we going to work to have times where this is put away? And what's amazing right now in this moment in history, which is very early on in our tech revolution, is we have a false narrative that's happening in homes that it's okay that kids sleep with technology in their bedroom. And eventually, I believe, and we're working hard on this, we will think about this in the same way as we do with seatbelts, that it will be automatic that families keep devices out of the bedroom, particularly during the school week. We're currently not there, with estimations of about 80% of teens reporting having access to technology during the supposed sleep time. And the data around the sleep deprivation is immense. And that translates into worse decisions and more risk taking. We know that from the data. So if parents were to do one action that can help related to decisions around substances and less screen time, social media and video games, which are social, and all these other tantalizing treats, to validate that, of course, you want to be on these all the time and it makes sense, and you feel bad to not be available for your friends, etc. Validate all that. And then say, let's work together. We're going to need to have devices out of the bedroom, and talk more about the science. Let me just add, I am talking also about teenagers. I'm talking about the 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And I'm talking about having them say what time it goes away. I understand parents go to bed earlier at times, so the teen would bring it into the parents' room rather than this idea of a common space. I wouldn't focus on the fact that if they use it right before going to bed, that's also minuscule compared to having this device in the bedroom where we know the data around how often they're getting woken up or they wake up. We know so much of the data of how this is impacting sleep and choices around substances.
That was so powerful. I mean, the detail and the nuance of that is so actionable. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I want to jump in. There's one other thing in terms of parents supporting phones off and away at
Yeah.
school. So we have a campaign called Away for the Day. People can find it awayfortheday.org. And I think, schools are just planning right now for the new issues they're going to tackle as the school year starts. And just yesterday, I talked to two administrators that were changing their rules at the high school level around phones off and away. And they'll ask, do you have any suggestions of how to roll this out? And I'm really worried about, because the parents want to reach the kids, and I often get a lot of pushbacks from the parents. So if there's one gift we can give our kids, as well as having it off at night, is to have this 8 hours of no access to social media at school. Right. So I'm not saying no computers at school, because those are so integrated in. And one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic was that most schools have computers now for their kids as they need them in the classrooms to use. But having their phones in their pockets all day, every day, and access is distracting. And also, it's the constant media bombardment, with all sorts of images. And so if we can support our schools implementing these kinds of off and away all day is key. And there was a principal I was talking to yesterday who said that they have that rule, that it's supposed to be off and away, but they know it's in their pockets. And they're getting the buzzes and they're getting the vibrations and they're asking to go to the bathroom to check. And so they were going to change it from just off the way to doing the phone pockets in the classroom, because then they can visually see that the phones are off.
And
so.
Yeah. And do you want to just say, Lisa, what the pockets are for people who are
like
listening?
Phone pockets where, like shoe pockets where you would put shoes in. They have similar ones often in schools now where you can put your phones in, right? As you walk in, you pop it in. And it's also a way that some teachers will take attendance by looking at the, you have to have your phone in there. That's their attendance measure.
And
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of, I don't know how many of you remember back in the fall of 2021 when Frances Hogan, who was working at Meta, then Facebook, released a lot of internal papers and slide decks that showed what was the concerns internally about teens and screen time. And almost half of teens that they surveyed, these surveys, they weren't nationally representative, said, I need help managing with Instagram. That's one very unscientific data point, but Meta knows it, and we as communities can do this. And a lot of teens do say, oh yeah, this is important. Lisa and I have done one of the few surveys to see what school policies were, but most importantly, what parents wanted. And over 80% of parents surveyed say, yes, I would love for phones to be put away for the day. But the big point take home that we've just been discussing is that if you care about social media and they get lots of stuff about shows in their feeds and substances, this is one lever that you and other parents can get involved in to see what's going on in the school and what could be done to decrease exposure to all of these messages.
And I like that we're talking about the school environment just right now anyway, because again, back to school, what do we want for our kids and what do we want to be thinking about as parents? But I do really like the way you're crafting this connection between media, between overuse in general, and its connection to sleep deprivation and bad decision making and increases in substances, and just kind of this tumble down effect. I mean, and in some ways, I guess, maybe all adolescent issues are related, something we could say. But let me ask you specifically, again, back to drugs and alcohol. I know there are myths that are out there. You cover a couple of them in the movie. And just maybe let's end with that. So parents, in addition to being directed to talk to their kids, and as you're saying, how you talk to your kids is so important, we do need to know some things so that we can even have these conversations. And our kids seem pretty savvy, sometimes much more than we are, maybe all the time, much more than we are, when it comes to drugs and alcohol. So talk to us about some of those myths. So as a parent, when I hear, okay, well, Europe, they drink at 18, what do I say to that?
Yeah. A lot of people in this country, teens included, feel that there wouldn't be so much teen drinking if it wasn't prohibited. Along with that is that idea of if they just started younger, they'd learn how to drink. Well, Lisa and I were curious about, okay, so what is going on in Europe? For example, in France, where the legal drinking age is 18, and there's a little bit more of this cultural norm around wine, for example. Well, when we looked deeply into the data, it was apparent that that was completely not a safe measure for these young people. In fact, 15-year-olds in France are 3 times as likely to report having binged drink in the past month than in the US when they survey teens here. This idea that teens are going to learn to drink responsibly, the reality is that teens often are drinking to get drunk, and that binge drinking is a real reality. And that what's important to understand about the brain science around this is that the mechanisms that help us to stop and know how to stop are not as fully engaged as teen. And so that ability to stop, oh, just have 1 or 2 drinks and then you can stop, really impaired. It's really deficient. I want to add, we can talk more about myths, but I think one of the most important points that I want listeners to know is that the research is consistently showing that as parents, when we let our teens know, let's take alcohol, that we hope that they choose not to drink, it is associated with teens drinking less. And it's not this bashing them over the head and scare tactics. It's having these savvy conversations, but also to not be so wishy-washy as to not say, you know what, I hope you choose not to drink until the legal age, and these are the reasons why. It's been clearly data after data shown. And so another myth, I'll let Lisa talk about the one, there's a myth related to, well, if I let them drink at home, it'll be safer, which basically is condoning them drinking. It's giving a mixed message if you say you're against it. But Lisa, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. Well, number one, start with the data shows that heavy drinkers in high school go on to be heavy drinkers in college. And so this idea around starting, allowing them to do it at home, they're at least they're safe at home. You're in some ways condoning it, right? So not all people that drink become addicted or become heavy drinkers, but you are sending some subtle messages to your kids that it's okay if you're letting them drink at home. And so in our community and many communities that I talk, parents often feel like let's let them have the party at home. They'll be safer. At least they're not out in a parking lot and driving around. But the facts are that that does not bear out to be true. And there's no way to keep kids safe when they're over drinking. And when they get together as a group, there's data that shows that they're more likely to drink to excess. So whether that's in your house or not. So in my house, I made it very clear that I would love to have kids over and I wanted them to have fun, but the expectation was there was not going to be substance use or drinking allowed at the house. And my kids were always aware of that and that that was the rule here. And I quickly, there were certain friends' houses that I knew that when they would go out, that we're going to X person's house, that meant I knew that those parents let them smoke pot or those parents let them have alcohol. And it just was early, often, and always that I had that rule. Had many times kids did come and hang out and play music and
Have great food and dance.
have great food at a movie night outside in the back. Like I would, maybe overly like, here, we can do this, we can do that, but because I wanted the kids to be around. But everyone knows, I mean, everyone knows that this is a house that is that, and they still came to the house. But those were the rules.
The fact that kids kept coming is great. I think that says a lot about our kids, both wanting a variety of experiences and or just wanting the refuge of not having to deal with substances.
One of the other main reasons I really was not comfortable allowing kids that were not my own to be using in the house is I had no idea, do they have addiction in their family? Do they have addiction for themselves? And I didn't want to be the one that was making those decisions for those kids and those families. And that is kind of at the root of what really irked me about the families that were allowing kids to come and do those things at their house. Maybe they felt like it was fine for their kids and that their kids didn't have a problem, but there were certainly kids in that group that did. And the other things I would do is just learn about what happened at those parties. And there's certain kids that got very violent or would potentially start fights and kind of point out those patterns of, wow, maybe they have a problem. And, like just getting the kids to think about it so that they could make better decisions, be better friends.
Right.
It's really resonated with parents when they have heard Lisa, because she actually says this in the film, that she has told her kids repeatedly that this is a big reason I don't allow it in our home, is because I don't want to make those decisions for those kids and those families. So I think parents having a bag of ideas of ways to explain why they have these decisions. So myths are a key one based on the data, as well as other examples of what parents and what's worked for them.
I find that mental health connection to substance use and the hereditary nature of addiction so powerful and so missing in our understanding as parents. I heard you talk about that in the movie, Lisa. I was so grateful because there's no parent out there that wants to hurt a child, but there's no parent out there that understands that underage substance use is linked to so many mental health issues and is the number one factor in adult addiction. And I find the minute parents hear that, they do kind of shift. It's like, oh, okay, this is different now. This is not just about providing a good time. This has bigger implications. I think that's such a powerful message.
Yeah. And I will just, data that comes out from the government funding, wonderful data around this, is that teens who report depression symptoms are 3 times more likely to report problematic substance use. So this is conferred by the data of exactly what you're saying. I would just add, as a physician taking care of teens, and is that often the substances are used as a way to placate anxious feelings or to relieve a really uncomfortable feeling, boredom, to fit in with their friends because that their friend group, that's what they do. And it's important that parents know that having your teen see a doctor who sees the teen alone one time can be a really good resource. And you can talk when you go in as a parent, say, I don't know what's happening in the world of substances. You prime the doctor to know that you want them to have a discussion. And a good physician will make sure to not be judgmental, but let them know, is there any concerns they have, and to give a little bit of data that can be helpful, and for that teen to know that they're a resource and that we have all sorts of different resources in the clinics.
That's such great advice. I think the fact that research is showing parents have so much influence is really powerful. I always laugh, if you've raised a high school child, which we all have here, we know that they're masters of making us feel like we don't have any influence. And that's just not true from a statistical standpoint. And then that there are all these different ways in which we can activate directly with our children that you've described, and then also on their behalf in the community with doctors, with community members that may influence. It's really encouraging. And I guess I'm feeling very optimistic about the school year starting, and I hope our listeners are as well. So this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much. Before we end, is there anything else that you would share with us? Anything else we should be thinking about?
I want to just say, so Screenagers Under the Influence came out in April. So there's, many schools that still haven't seen it, and bring it to their populations, to their parent populations, to come together, have these conversations, connect to a person in it, learn about all these things we were talking about. And also the schools giving access to the movies to teachers to show it in the classroom, to reinforce all these issues that come. And I think it's a really amazing tool. It's not a PowerPoint. It's something that they connect to and has a lot of actionable ideas, and also can use as a restorative practice. If the kids are caught vaping or other things, to watch the movie and to then, do some activities in the curriculum that we've built. So it's a mix, right? Our movies are a mix of parent and school, and a lot of it is the parent approaching the school, supporting the school in having the kind of work done in the school.
Fantastic.
I would just reiterate how early we are in this tech revolution. AI, ChatGPT is just one example. We're just at the beginning. And it makes sense that as parents, we've struggled big time, but it's also hopeful. We can make pivots now and change things in our schools and in our homes that are going to be beneficial to our kids now and beneficial to them as parents when they're needing to parent around these things. We didn't get to talk a lot about weed, which is in the film, one of the most, fabulous researcher that we found in the film that we just love, as well as stories that are so relatable and important. I would refer people to the Screenagers movie website to find the blog, which has all sorts of posts, some that are related to weed and the things that we're talking about that give conversations that can be had in their weekly or whatever times that families can carve out for short conversations and actionables.
That's a great reference. THC, the active ingredient in weed, is no joke, very serious, and parents absolutely have to start understanding it and being able to talk to their kids about it. So much is at risk with underage use, and that is a great direction for parents to check out. Thank you both so much. This was exceptional. Really, really appreciate your being here and appreciate all the work you're doing to help us all navigate through drugs and alcohol and adolescent issues in general. Really are grateful.
Oh, our pleasure. It was great to be here, Debbie. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for bringing these issues to light to so many as well.
We want to remind listeners that Talk They Hear You materials, including this podcast, can be found at the Talk They Hear You website. That is talktheyhearyou.samhsa.gov, all spelled out. Talk They Hear You, no spaces, .samhsa, which is SAMHSA.gov. Please share this site and this podcast with your friends. The more we can be in conversation with each other, the better for everyone, especially our kids. Also, we would like to hear from you. Would you like to be on our show? Do you have any stories to share or tips and techniques that have worked or not worked for you in the past as a parent? Do you have any questions for us or feedback on topics or improvements of any kind? We know your input will help us design the most useful interviews possible. Please contact us at whatparentsaresaying@gmail.com for any of this. Again, all spelled out, whatparentsaresaying@gmail.com. This podcast is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Talk They Hear You is a national prevention campaign that aims to help parents and caregivers talk with their kids about the dangers and risks of underage drinking and other drug use. As a reminder, the views expressed here are not necessarily those of SAMHSA or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.